You're watching NDTV and I'm Maria Shakil. The United Nations Security Council says that Hamas' attack on Israel is war on the free world. Israel too is pitching it as that. Among the many diplomatic aftershocks of this ongoing conflict is the fear of a possible derailing of the Saudi-Israel peace deal being brokered by the United States. Over the next half hour, we will analyze the stakes of various world players as we witness another war unfold amidst us. Just 2 weeks ago, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman for the first time publicly talking about normalization deal with Israel. He said in an interview with Fox News, "Every day we get closer." Seen as a historic effort since the Cold War began, this deal has the potential of positioning MBS as the most influential leader in not just the Arab but the entire Muslim world. But will this surprise attack against Israel and the subsequent escalation of war deal a severe blow to the landmark deal being brokered by the US?
I think that Saudi Arabia and many other moderate Muslims in the world that, they hate the Hamas not less than every free man in the world.
During a speech at the United Nations recently, Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had declared the Abraham Accords as heralding a new age of peace. But things changed, and the same Netanyahu declared,
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה, לא במבצע, לא בסבבים, במלחמה. הבוקר חמאס פתח במתקפת פתע רצחני נגד מדינת ישראל ונגד אזרחיה. אנחנו בתוך זה משעות הבוקר המוקדמות. כינסתי את ראשי מערכת הביטחון. הנחיתי קודם כל לטהר את היישובים מהמחבלים שחדרו פנימה. הפעולה הזאת מתבצעת בשעות הללו.
It is clear that the violence has thrown the spotlight on disputes between Israel and the Palestinians, making it harder to brush under the carpet the complicated and complex issues the way 2020 Abraham Accords did. In September 2020, in the White House, the UAE and Israel deepened their relations across a number of economic and defense domains. Months after the two Arab nations signed on, two more joined the accords, Morocco and Sudan. And it seemed like the US was possibly on track to sign up even more Arab countries. None of the Arab states which joined the accords share a border with Israel, nor have any participated in combat against it in any of the 7 Arab-Israeli wars fought between 1948 and 2006, except for Morocco briefly during the October 1973 war. However, the normalization helped foster increased levels of diplomatic engagement and conflict de-escalation across the Middle East, as seen through an array of bilateral and multilateral initiatives such as the Baghdad Summits, the Negev Summit, and the Israel-Lebanon Maritime Agreement. Between January 2021 and January 2023, 45,000 Israelis visited UAE, and the Israeli companies did business in the Gulf country too. With the biggest incursions into Israel in decades coinciding with the US-backed moves to push Saudi Arabia towards normalizing ties with Israel in return for a defense deal between Washington and Riyadh, it appears the message is also to Saudi Arabia. Iranian-backed Lebanese group Hezbollah said, and I quote, "This is a message to Saudi Arabia, which is crawling towards Israel, and to the Americans who are supporting normalization and supporting Israel. There is no security in the whole region as long as Palestinians are left outside of the equation." In 2002, Saudi Arabia had proposed a peace initiative which offered Israel security and normal relations with 57 Arab and Muslim countries in exchange for its withdrawal from occupied Palestinian territories. As expected, Israel had outrightly rejected it. So will this landmark deal meet a similar fate? There have been several meetings between the Israelis and Saudis. The Saudis have generally sought to test the water and gauge Saudi public reaction to their moves. News of the meetings were leaked to the media. In 2015, both countries acknowledged that they had been holding secret meetings to discuss Iranian ambitions in the region. In 2016, former Saudi intelligence chief Prince Turki al-Faisal met with General Yaakov Amridor, a former senior advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, at the Washington Institute, a pro-Israel think tank in Washington. Later in 2016, a former Saudi general, Anwar Eshki, led a team of businessmen and academics, and he held unprecedented talks with Israeli members of Knesset. Let me try and decode this with our expert panel, which is joining me now. Anil Trigunayat is former ambassador also to Libya. Michael Kugelman is joining me from Washington, D.C. He is the South Asia Institute Director at the Wilson Center. Aaron Lev joining me from Haifa, Israeli author and journalist. We also have Sami Hamdi, senior journalist, joining me from UK. Michael, beginning with you, will it be a pipe dream, almost something that will never be achieved?
Well, I mean, at this point in time, it certainly looks like all that momentum that you had mentioned earlier is on hold in terms of advancing the spirit of the Abraham Accords. Certainly, I wouldn't rule it out, but obviously, the longer this war goes on, and the deeper and the longer the intensity of the Israeli retaliations are, obviously, the more setbacks there will be to the efforts to bring about more normalizations from the Abraham Accords. And obviously, if you look at the U.S. perspective on this, I'd argue that the Abraham Accords are one of the very few major foreign policy initiatives to come out of the Trump administration that have been embraced wholeheartedly by the Biden administration. The Indo-Pacific strategy may be one of the few others, but this is clearly a big blow in the immediate term, at least, to U.S. interests as well.
So you're calling this as a big blow, but Aaron, is that the largest sentiment also in Israel? That the Israel-Saudi deal, which was seen as the most landmark policy initiative which could change the free world completely, that could take a hit. Although if you look at the series of statements that have come in from the Arab nations, they have been all talking about de-escalation rather than escalation, which Israel tends to be heading towards. Aaron, if you can hear me.
To whom?
Yes.
This is to me. Okay. Look, I think the approach of Netanyahu, at least since 2007, 2008, is that Palestinian-Israel conflict is a bilateral one. And the our biggest problem in Israel is that it had become an international issue rather than a problem that Israelis and Palestinians have to solve themselves. Now, I don't think, at least this administration, Israeli one, under Netanyahu, will change the paradigm. I think they believe that in the long run, even if now we will see hellish and nightmarish pictures from Gaza, I think in the long run they believe that the big Sunni countries, Egypt and Saudi Arabia, they need a peace with Israel the same way that Israel needs a peace with them.
No, but if you look at the choice of words of various Arab nations, there is a great degree of assertion that there has to be de-escalation of what they see as occupation of the other side.
Look,
including the one by Saudi Arabia.
Okay, please, okay, forgive me for this, but I do not delve into statements. I try to decode the Israeli view, the Israeli view according to this government. Maybe we will have a different government under Gantz or under Lapid, but right now, under Netanyahu, the philosophy is that in the long run, Israel can move on with Arab states.
Okay. So let's
without
see,
giving too much to Palestinians.
When we say in the long run, Sami Hamdi, what is this long run then? And what does it do to all the efforts that have been made by Western nations, particularly Joe Biden?
Thank you for having me, Maria, and greetings to the other guests. I think that what's important to note is that it appears that the Arab states that have normalized, and even Saudi Arabia, are monitoring the situation. I think that the Saudi Crown Prince has been rattled, and that was reflected in the Saudi statement that once more referred to Israel as an occupying power. And for context, the word ihtilal or occupier had been omitted from previous statements during the talks for normalization. So seeing it in the statement again suggests that bin Salman is a bit uncomfortable with what's happening with this escalation in Palestine and Israel. Having said that, the front page of Ukaz newspaper, the Saudi national newspaper, doesn't actually talk much about Palestine or even celebrate what the Palestinians have achieved in terms of taking back some of the settlements that Israel has seized, suggesting that the Saudi position remains one that is looking to keep the door open to resuming ties with or resuming talks with normalization. The UAE has been quite brazen and come out openly defending Netanyahu and criticizing the Palestinians for what they call the escalation that has taken place. Meanwhile, the other Gulf states or even Turkey itself, usually Erdogan would refer to Israel as a terrorist state. This time, it seems he's holding the stick from the middle, trying very carefully not to offend Netanyahu because he's interested in this gas pipeline and he wants to pursue warmer ties. So I think that what's happening at the moment is that the Gulf states are not averse to normalization, but they're monitoring the situation. And I think the US has noticed these signals, which is why it appears there's a discussion taking place where Netanyahu wants a ground offensive and really wants to pummel Gaza, but the Americans are imposing a set of red lines in the hope that they can restore an environment through which they can facilitate normalization once more. So I actually think that if we're talking about Saudi Arabia in particular, the signs coming out of Saudi Arabia and coming out from bin Salman are, I'm uncomfortable with this escalation. Public opinion has made me buckle, and I have to refer to it as an occupation. But as you can see from my media, I'm still very much inclined towards talks for normalization. And I think the Americans now are scrambling for a de-escalation to refacilitate those talks.
The domestic considerations will be changing the overall equation in the Middle East, certainly post this war. Ambassador Trigunayat, you have served in Jordan. Help us understand, because the Abraham Accord, which begins with 3 nations, has other countries joining in, but there are many others who have their reservations, and particularly with Saudi-Israel deal in the works, which was in the works till now. Is there a sense that after this, there would be some resistance which could come from several other countries, the neighbors of Saudi Arabia, including UAE?
Saudi Arabia itself has a very different role. Saudi Arabia, the king is the custodian of the 2 holy mosques.
Yes.
So he also carries with him the Islamic duties in a way. And therefore, that leadership constrains them from going beyond a certain point. Now, while the going was good, MBS is looking for reforms, and everybody has been talking to and working with Israel under the table, I would say, for quite some time now. And the security matters, they have been meeting. Your report also said it. And so there was always this thing, but to overtly recognize Israel and to work with, and forgetting completely the Arab peace plan, which Saudi Arabia itself had forwarded earlier. So you have seen in the United Nations, their foreign minister very clearly spoke about the Palestinian issue. MBS himself, even though not in not such great details, in that famous interview at the CBS, he said that we want the normalization, but at the same time, that there should be some solution to the Palestinian issue. So I come back to having served in the region and knowing this, that there is a great disjunct between the leadership of the Gulf countries and their street. That is very much there. So they cannot go against their street beyond a point because it does not serve their purpose at all, while it may just do that. So they have to first look at home. Now today, over the years, I have seen that decades, there is a general Palestinian fatigue among the Arab countries overall. So there is not such a great enthusiasm that, okay, Palestinian cause is the most primary cause. But this particular incident which has happened, and now the subsequent Israeli action, which it show all kinds of humanitarian disasters and whatnot in Gaza, is further going to cement that particular sentiment. And I think that will make all the leaders in the Gulf countries far more reserved.
Okay, then Michael, what does it do to the image of Joe Biden and the larger big brother role that US has played so far in the Middle East? The elections are not very far for Joe Biden. He has that challenge as well. He wanted to really, position himself as a world leader who could really do that unthinkable deal, ensure that Israel and Saudi could come together.
Well, keeping in mind that this whole Abraham Accords thing flows from the Trump administration, Biden was really picking up on that. But looking at this from a domestic political context here, I would argue that that Biden's response and the response of the Biden administration on the whole to this war has been, I would argue for the most part, warmly received in the U.S. The U.S. relationship with Israel had been somewhat shaky the last few months because of concerns in Washington about some of the domestic political developments in Israel, particularly with Netanyahu. But we have seen that, we've known that strong support for Israel is a bipartisan. There's a very strong bipartisan consensus around support for Israel. It's been like that for a very long time in the United States. And we've seen responses from members of Congress. There's been nearly unanimous support for Israel from pretty much everyone, nearly everyone in the Congress. And so President Biden has been coming out with very strong statements about solidarity. We're with the people of Israel. We're with the Israelis. So regardless of the possible setbacks to Biden's goal to get a deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia, I think that this terrible conflict that's broken out, I don't want to put it in these types of terms, but I think that it could help him a little bit politically, in the sense that it's enabled him to, really demonstrate his and his government's solidarity with Israel and the Israeli people at a very terrible moment for them. And I think that will certainly not be politically costly for him.
Okay, Ambassador Trigunath, in these circumstances, given the kind of personal equation that Prime Minister Modi has with Benjamin Netanyahu, and also India's stand vis-a-vis Palestine is very well known. What role can India necessarily play going ahead? And do you get a sense that similar to what happened, at a time when the Ukraine-Russia war was at its peak, there were several leaders and there were several discussions that could India play the role of the peacemaker? What role do you think India can play? Or do you think India can play a role at all?
Well, in the first place...
I think that India has... Sorry.
Yes, please. Yeah. Go ahead, Anil.
In the first place, as you know, that India in the recent past has dehyphenated its policy between Palestine and Israel. Every relationship is standing on its own. India has a very close strategic partnership with Israel, and Prime Minister Modi has conveyed his sentiments in his tweet. At the same time, India's position as far as the Palestinian issue is concerned is also very clear. And it has been there that we have been advocating the two-state solution for a long time, but through the bilateral discussions and the quartet and others who have greater influence on Israel to be able to come to terms and come to some table and discuss these issues. So India has been always in favor of discussions, but although directly we have not taken any lead in this, and I doubt very much that this time also India will be able to take any great lead.
Because the role and the stakes that India has in the Middle East has changed a great deal, Aaron, isn't it true? Given the kind of investments that are being considered, given the fact that there is that economic corridor about which the details were unveiled only during the G20 summit in New Delhi recently. Aaron, you have to unmute yourself.
Yes, it took me 2 seconds. Okay. Look, I think that, again, I cannot speak about India. I can speak about Modi's India. I cannot speak about Israel. I can speak about Netanyahu's Israel. So I think that Modi's India does not see the Palestinian-Israeli conflict as something that should be a barrier. Of course, now we will go through an easy time because Israel is determined, even for internal political reasons, and also because of the horrific pictures that we have all seen. Israel will have to do things that maybe even many Indians will feel not very easy with them. But again, I do not see it as what will happen next month or after 2 months. And anyway, the corridor, we would not have seen the first, the first vehicle or the first rail after 2 or 3 months. It is a long shot, this idea. So I do think that as far as Modi's India is concerned, in 1 or 2 years, we will see the corridor. It will go from India to the Emirates and Saudi Arabia and Haifa and Piraeus in Greece. I think Modi's India believes that the problems between Palestinians and Israel is only problems between Palestinians and Israel.
Okay.
It is
I
not
just
India's
have
problem.
enough time for the final words coming from Sami and also Michael. Sami, given the way the situation is evolving and the strong words that is coming from Israel, where they are equating these attacks as their 9/11, a possibility of any kind of peace being brokered by US or any country, do you think that will take perhaps decades now? All efforts will be put on a complete halt?
I think the reality is that I think that we're increasingly getting to a stage where talks might actually happen. The Palestinians have secured a major victory. For the first time since 1948, they finally took back land from the Israeli occupier. They finally took back those settlements. They finally were able to take back those territories that Israel brutally and violently seized from them. I think the hostages that they've taken, that they're able to trade, for context, they traded one Israeli soldier for 1,500 Palestinians arbitrarily arrested by the Israelis. This is already a huge victory for the Palestinians. And I think now that they're ready to sit down for negotiations and to talk, to cement this particular victory. I think the problem now is the humiliation that Netanyahu has suffered at the hands of Palestinians. Remember that Netanyahu was sitting with Erdogan of Turkey, who's looking for warmer ties, sitting with bin Salman, sitting with bin Zayed. There was this sentiment that the Palestinian cause was dying and that the Palestinians no longer had agency. Netanyahu has been taken by surprise and humiliated by a people who are not seen to have the international support that would allow them to embark on this kind of offensive. And this is why I think that more than anything else, I think the Palestinians have demonstrated an agency and they're ready to talk to cement that agency. The issue that Americans have right now and what they're trying to do is they're trying to find a way out for Netanyahu where he can stand in front of the Israelis and say that this peace or this negotiations is a good thing. Netanyahu is desperate for some sort of pounding of the Palestinians, given that there's a bloodlust now amongst his supporters and amongst the Israelis, and the Americans haven't found that solution yet.
So that climb down, you are thinking that will be coming from the Americans. So Michael, final word to you. Where does this entire Middle East crisis go from here onwards if the Palestinians see this as their victory of sorts?
Well, that's why I'm concerned that mediation efforts, which are clearly going to be very active, may not be successful, at least in the coming days. And we've already seen how horrific the toll has been, the humanitarian toll has been. So it's very sobering. And look, final word, I think, stepping back for a second, the U.S. for a long time has been trying to reframe its interests in the Middle East, not wanting to get involved in or bogged down in war and conflict in the region, wanting to promote connectivity and so on. We've seen that through this new connectivity initiative as well as the I2U2 initiative, and that's now all on hold. And obviously it'll be more difficult to return to those initiatives the longer this war goes on.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. Michael Kugelman, Anil Trigunayath, Aaron Lev, and Sami Hamdi. Of course, it is going to impact the ongoing peace talks. But what next? Is there a major setback for United States and Joe Biden in particular, that certainly can be concluded rightly. That's all from me. I'll be seeing you at 9 p.m. Thanks so much for watching.